Hello. Well, it's a long time since I have done this, since we were in lockdown, I'm guessing. But I did say in this new term and this new season that when we did the talks at Bread and Cup, Storm Bread and Cup, that I would record them afterwards, so that those who help with the children's work, or maybe anyone who's not managed to come on the day, can keep up with the thread of what we're looking at and thinking about this term. We're quite we love it when people contribute when I'm talking at Storm, so it's going to be a bit strange today to not have anyone kind of passing judgment on what I'm saying, but hopefully I'll incorporate some of the feedback that I got on Sunday. So new theme, we're thinking about recapturing the wonder, very much about being re-enchanted and being able to see God at work in our world and reminding ourselves that He has never left. And we did start by reading a couple of verses from Psalm 77, which talks about God's footsteps being beneath the waters of the sea, and very much reminding ourselves that we can find ourselves in situations and circumstances where it feels like we can't see a way through. But that doesn't mean that God's abandoned us or He's not there for us. There is a way. We just need to open our eyes, open our ears, maybe put different glasses on and see God at work in our world. And of course, this particular Sunday, we were thinking very much about the passing of Queen Elizabeth II and praying very much for our new king and our new government, that they would also, like her, use their faith to help them make good decisions, godly decisions, wise decisions for our nation, and that, as we know, affects the world. So my subtitle for my talk was Dancing Gorillas and Have You Seen Any recently? And lots of you out there might know about this experiment that happened a few years ago, which was very much about testing people's perceptive powers. A group of people, I think they were radiographers, were given a video to watch. There were two teams playing with a basketball. One team was dressed in white, one team was dressed in black, and they were asked to count how many passes the team dressed in white made with the basketball and how many passes the team dressed in black made with the basketball. And in the middle of this, a chap comes in a gorilla costume, does a little dance, and then walks off again. And at the end of watching the video, the participants were asked how many passes each team had made, and they were usually pretty good at getting that. And then they were asked if they'd seen the dancing gorilla. And amazingly, especially if you look at it on YouTube, I recommend you go and have a look, 83% of them did not see the dancing gorilla because that was not what they were focusing on. And I've been really enjoying doing some research into this subject and reading some really inspiring books. One called What We Once Knew and one called Hunting Magic Eels. And in Hunting Magic Eels, the author basically says he feels like for the last 500 years, we've been counting the passes and forgetting to see the dancing gorillas. Re-enchantment, seeing God at work, present everywhere. Oh my goodness. So sometimes when we hear things like that, there's a bit of us that thinks, oh no, I've got to kind of make myself believe this. I've got to imagine God on street corners or seeing angels everywhere or summon up more faith than I've had before. But actually, it's not so much about belief and summoning up belief. It's about perception, how we see the world. And as I said at the beginning, maybe putting on new glasses or putting new hearing aids in. I was swapping stories with a friend the other day who's been to have a hearing test. And he said the first thing he heard when he put his hearing aids in was the ticking of the clock. And I certainly resonate with that experience. I have one hearing aid that I put in reluctantly in my left ear. And the minute I put it in, the first thing I hear is the ticking of the clock. And that just reminds us that clock is ticking all the time, whether I'm hearing it or not. And that just reminds us that God is at work in our world. whether we're always conscious of it, but it's about putting that hearing aid in or putting those glasses on. Someone said it's an intentional recovery of a holy capacity to see and experience God in the world. And I do think probably as children we all had that, but something in life diminishes that ability to see God at work. And generally, I think the perception is, and I would agree with it, there's two main things that take us away from seeing God at work in the world. One is distraction. I'm sure we all know a lot about that. And the other is disenchantment. And distraction, of course, recently, over the last few years, there's been so many things that have just captured our thinking. COVID, the pandemic, which is still with us, even though not as acute as it has been, but every time you turned on the news, the television, the radio, opened a newspaper, looked at your phone, turned on your computer, there was something about COVID, and it seemed to just take over all of our thinking. And then, of course, there was Brexit and all the political shenanigans that went on, and the re-electing of a new prime minister. And again, that completely consumed us on the news. And of course, the Ukraine war. So many of us never expected to experience a war in Europe in our lifetime, and yet there it was. And again, when it began, completely consuming every news and political broadcast that we saw. And now, of course, the passing of the Queen, again, it fills our thoughts with other things, and we can get lost in it. And none of those are bad things. We need to keep up with them. We need to know what's going on in the world. But when we get consumed by them, when we get distracted by them, that can fill our vision and fill our thinking and affect us emotionally and distract us certainly from seeing God at work and seeing hope and joy and all those things, those footsteps under the sea that are there all the time. So that's distraction. We'll come back to that again in a minute. But the other one is disappointment. And I have met so many people, and indeed have experienced it myself, where I've been disappointed with life, what life has thrown at me, or what I feel God hasn't done or has done, or prayers that haven't been answered or not answered in the way that I was hoping for. And disappointment can kind of wall us in. And one of the writers that I read, which I thought was a really good illustration, said it's a bit like a pond, where the sides of the pond are your disappointment, and after a while the water just stops being fresh and it just starts digging up all the muck from the bottom, and there's no ability whatever to see any hope or any sign of any good coming out of any of these things. And then we started to think about this particular story of Moses, and Moses had certainly gone through a lot of distraction and disappointment. If you remember the story of Moses, I'm sure you remember at the beginning of his story where the Pharaoh is wanting to murder all the baby boys, and his mother hides him in a basket, and he gets rescued by the princess and brought up in the palace. And then through a series of events, he realizes that he has a calling on his life to rescue God's people, but he goes about it all wrong, ends up killing an Egyptian slave driver and runs away, completely leaving everything behind, as if that's gone now, that part of my life is finished. And he goes off into the desert. He meets a family, he gets married, he starts his own family, and he becomes a shepherd, having been a prince of Egypt, having been an Israelite with a strong calling on his life, and he completely leaves it, allows the disappointment and the distractions in his life to lead him away from all of that, and he's just looking after sheep. He's a nomad looking after sheep in the desert. And then one day he sees this bush on fire, and that was quite a common thing. In fact, we saw it this year during the drought, where things would just start being consumed by fire. And so Moses had seen this many times before, but what startled him this time was that although the bush appeared to be burning, it wasn't being consumed. And so he goes nearer, and when God, who's in the bush, the dancing gorilla on that street corner, sees that he's got Moses' attention. He calls out to him and said, Moses, this is the Lord. This is holy ground. Take your shoes off. And Moses does take his shoes off, and God places that call on his life again. He said, I have called you. I have appointed you. There is a task for you to do. I have heard my people crying out, and I need you to go and rescue them from slavery. And I kind of resonate with that story, because I think so often when bad things happen to us, we easily get distracted. I don't know what it might be for you. Me and my husband are slightly distracted by the Archers at the moment, because there's a really strong, interesting storyline in there. You might have your own particular soap opera that you follow, or getting lost in books, or what can we watch on Netflix tonight, or even more serious ways we can distract ourselves from the disappointments we've experienced in life. The use of drugs and the use of alcohol, things that are much more difficult to get away from, but ways of taking us away from the pain of what's going on in our lives. But you know, it's well known that if we actually allow ourselves to face and look at and experience the pain that's going on in our lives, like Moses, we will be burned. Yes, we will be affected by them, as we are by the news that's happening at the moment, but not consumed. And we will be like Daniel's friends in another story in the Bible. We will go through the fire, but when we come out of it, we will not smell of smoke. Wow. So we took a moment to be quiet, to invite the Holy Spirit to come particularly. We took our shoes off, some of us, and we held our hands out and invited God just to meet us, that we would have a moment with God that would kind of maybe bring us back to that point and reinvigorate us to see God at work in his world and God at work in our lives, and stir up the sense of hope that that will bring. So my recommendation to you, when you finish listening to my talk, to turn everything off and not be distracted by anything, and just to pray, maybe take your shoes off, open your hands, invite the Holy Spirit to come and let God speak to us. And let's begin this journey of re-seeing God at work in his world and being re-enchanted with the magic and the hope and the joy that that will bring to us. May God bless you until we meet again. Thanks for listening.